actually, let's do this. I want to show you. So the passage today is the binding of Isaac. And it is a brutal passage. I will also tell you that there are thousands upon thousands of articles and books written on this. It's called the Akedah in, I may be mispronouncing that. Anybody Hebrew? Any Jews and like Akedah? Is that how I'd say it? Anybody know? I don't know where the accent is. But this has produced an intense amount of interest. Because it is, Kierkegaard writes a whole thing on it, the teleological suspension of the ethical. People are bothered by this text. So we're going to be bothered by this text today. But as we start, I want to remind us that the things that this text is talking about aren't just ancient problems, but they are long-standing impulses of humanity. This is actually remarkable. This was a body of a 13-year-old girl who was sacrificed probably in the 14 or 1500s by Incans. She was left at 17,000 feet, probably drugged, but offered up as an offering to the gods. And preserved because she was at 17,000 feet. Now on display in a museum, which is also kind of crazy. This is a poster from the 1980s. It's an Iranian poster. And the poster is advertising or encouraging young boys to enlist in the Iranian army. The girl on the right is supposed to be sort of the loss, the lament of him going away. The Iranian army in the 1980s cleared landmines in the Iraq War. And they did that by recruiting young children and young kids, teenagers, and some as young as 9, to run ahead of the soldiers across the landmines so that they would clear them for the soldiers who ran behind. It's not new for us to sacrifice youth, children, others to appease the gods. So, I want to read this text and remember that the world that Abraham lives in, like ours, is impinging on him. It shapes him. It shapes his moral imagination and what he thinks or how he thinks about God. And in the ancient Near East, where Abraham is, that world, you sacrificed people. Now, just to say, I should say, or disclose, my people apparently did this. The Celts in Britain and Ireland did this. There's evidence of that archaeologically. It's all over Mesopotamia. The Shang dynasty in China, it's like, seems like we were really into this. And of course, it has its modern forms. So Abraham, in our story, when he's asked to do what we're going to read about, that's not an unusual thing for a God to demand. It's right in line with gods who regularly ate or depended on the flesh of humankind and demanded certain kinds of sacrifices. Now, the other thing that I want to do is there's a, let's see, where's my little quote here? We're going to sort of wrestle around in this text for a brief moment, like we're wont to do when I preach, right? And it's going to have some jagged edges. It's going to have some mystery. It's going to be confusing. But like in godly play, right, we're going to wonder together. And a lot of things might come up. And I'm going to we're going to air all those because this is actually what Jews and Christians have done throughout the ages. So we're participating in the wandering around in this crazy text, okay? I see a professor out there nodding who could do this better, so a little nervous. Okay, so let's read this. After these events, now, just a little reminder, after these events includes the second time that Abraham fibs about whether Sarah is his wife and like sacrifices her into like a harem, and Abraham, like us, sometimes doesn't get things right the first or second time. But he's also sojourning. He's decided to live among the Philistines. He's living among a people who are not monotheistic. We forget, right? Remember, Abraham is called in the Bible, right? We're following this grand story. Abraham is a guy who comes in after like the world's been destroyed because of wickedness and profound violence, rampant violence, right? And Abraham's this guy who gets kind of plucked out of nowhere and told, yeah, I'm going to do something really different. And I am actually the one God who created everything, who's really different than all those other gods that you see around you. Now, Abraham, like us, or at least like me, is going to take some time to kind of get to know this God, especially like us, when he's surrounded by other kinds of gods. So, after these events, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham! Abraham says, here I am. God said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him up as an entirely burned offering there on one of the mountains that I will show you. Abraham got up early in the morning, harnessed his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, together with his son Isaac. He split the wood for the entirely burnt offering, set out, and went to the place God had described to him. Now, I just think about this moment here. Any things you notice that might be sort of odd? Remember that Abraham is a fairly wealthy man. He's kind of like, ancient Near Eastern aristocrat in that he has a lot of resources. Anything odd? Some commentators find some of the order of this a little weird. As if Abraham is kind of doing things wrongly, or that's going to kind of extend the time. What does he do? Huh? He splits the wood himself. Yeah. Now, just to say, that was probably not Abraham's daily duty, right? He's got dudes. He's got a lot of dudes to do this kind of work. What else do you notice? Some of the commentators are like, he harnesses the donkey, like gets the donkey already, and then, so first of all, he does it. I mean, think about those British, at least I feed on those British shows, The aristocrats are never out. Yeah, nobody else is out there, right, doing the saddle, right? He saddles the donkey first, and then he goes and splits the wood. You're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, it's all out of order. It could be that this is all, now just to say, this is probably what he has available to him, is a donkey, maybe a camel, but horses weren't introduced yet, I don't think, into the area at this point in time. So donkey was his, or sometimes it's an ass, right? Said it's an ass. He splits the wood and he decides to go. So some commentators think, well, maybe he's kind of delaying. Maybe he's hoping that he's interrupted at any of these points. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw a place in the distance. Now, just as a note, a thread through Abraham's life is that he's sent out to these places. Like, that's kind of what Abraham has to do. But this time for a very terrible reason. He looked up and saw the place at a distance. Abraham said to his servants, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will walk up there, worship, and then come back to you. Now, actually, in the Hebrew, it's that they both will come back. Doesn't quite come through in that. So that's kind of weird, right? Like, how's that going to work? Abraham took the wood for the entirely burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. He took the fire, so something to create fire with, and the knife in his hand. The knife, by the way, here is more like a cleaver or a very sharp, there's a particular word in Hebrew, this is a nasty knife. And the two of them walked on together. Now, Isaac is picking up on something. Isaac said to his father, my father, and he responds the same way he does to God. He said, I'm here, my son. And Isaac said, here's the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the entirely burnt offering? And here's where grammar and punctuation becomes very important. There's no punctuation in Hebrew, by the way. God himself will provide the burnt offering, my son. Now, I took out the comma because we add a comma. And actually, I think in many translations, they take my son and they put it at the beginning and say, my son, God himself will provide the burnt offering. But that's actually not how the Hebrew reads. The Hebrew is kind of ambiguous and kind of like, oh, are we being clever here, right? Because you could say, God will provide the burnt offering, my son. Where, it's all that, like, eats, shoots, and leaves, if you know that book, right? About the importance of a comma. But the two of them walk on together. So what do you make of Isaac in this? What do you imagine as you read this? What comes up for you? Like, what are you feeling as a parent, perhaps? What are you thinking as a kid, as a daughter or a son? Let it out. Just release.
How old is the kid?
Now, this is up for some debate. The word here used is lad, I think, like kind of translated sometimes lad. In the Hebrew tradition, some rabbis maintain that he's 37. Others posit that he's younger, like a teenager, because of the Hebrew that's here. But in some of the subtraction that they do in terms of the sequence of events, they think he's actually a young man. But in most of the illustrations, he's younger than that. Other things? Come on, like, let it out. Bonnie. No therapists out there in the room, like, going, like, come on, give it to me. Yeah, like there's something going on, right? Something's happening. Yes?
I wonder if Isaac has ever gone to this place before. If this is his first time offering sacrifice, if there's muscle memory for this, or if he's thinking, he's probably been before because he's asking, where's the sacrifice, Dad? And his dad is saying, God will provide. And he's got to be wondering, well, how?
Yeah, it takes him 3 days to get there. Okay, so the other thing that the rabbis, 3 days you're walking with your son to sacrifice him. I mean, no therapists out there? Come on, like, give me some feedback. What do you think about this story as being in the Bible? You know the end, he's going to be sort of admired for this in some way. No Mountainside, like, everybody's like, yeah, that's cool, I've wanted to do this on multiple occasions. No, I'm just kidding. Right? What are you feeling? What are you thinking?
Trust issues.
With who? Which character?
Well, the son towards the father.
The son for the father? Okay, so that he is trusting?
No.
Or that he's wondering, like he's getting suspicious. Yeah. Like, I'm not that dumb and that. Yeah. Yeah, he is obviously disturbed. And one of the things that John Middleton, an Old Testament scholar, has written actually a whole book, if you're interested, called The Silence of Abraham. It's all about the binding of Isaac and Job. He links Job and Isaac. But one of the things that Middleton notes is that Abraham is silent. Now, just as a note, we have a memory just before this. What has Abraham really pushed God on? He's famous for this. What? Pardon me? Okay, so actually he doesn't go straightforwardly to God to ask for Lot's life, which is probably actually, Middleton says, that's just what he should have done. Just been straightforward with this God and say, look, dude, you need to save my family. But he barters with God. Remember the thing with Sodom and Gomorrah? And he argues with God. And Middleton says, where is that guy? Right? He's silent. And Middleton thinks that this is absolutely wrong. That he's meant to push against this. That he doesn't realize the God that he actually, quote, knows. And that the test is actually for him to say, we have some phrases for this that are colloquial, but I'll just say, what the heck? No, why would you do this? Why would you expect this of me? How could you possibly expect this of me? What are you thinking? This God expects a pushback, wants us and wants Abraham to understand something about him and push against him. But after 3 days, he's still silent, right? The story, anyway. Anything else, Brad? What were you going to say?
You're asking about, like, how we feel as a parent. I mean, I'd be thinking about, like, what are my options for rejecting God here?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would hope that a bunch of you as therapists and just as parents would think this is a horrific story. When I told my daughter I was preaching on this, she's like, oh, yeah, I mean, that God is just, forget it. And she goes, Kierkegaard did not save that story for me. Oh, and of course, my daughter had read Kierkegaard. I was like, okay, well, there you go. Right? I'll be bluntly, some people worry that this actually fosters abuse and fosters the very kind of sensibility of those slides. That God would ask or demand of us a kind of sacrifice of our very flesh just to appease God. A lot of psychologists, including Alice Miller, who many of you know, goes nuts on this story and talks about how this drives a kind of crazy, weird, parental view of children and promotes child abuse. That's her accusation. This is a horrific story. Okay. Oh, let's see. All right. So Isaac said, here's the wood, here's the fire, where's the lamb? God himself. Okay, they walk on together. So it's just the two of them, and there's an irony here if you notice, right? They arrive at the place that God had described to him. Abraham built the offer, arranged the wood, tied up his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now in Hebrew, actually, this is a mirror of the wood. Isaac puts the wood on his back to carry it, and here Isaac is laid on the wood. So Isaac is carrying his own fuel for his own sacrifice, which is just kind of like, yeah, exactly like, I mean, it's thick. This story is thick weird, right? You know, Jefferson's Bible, this would be one that you take out, right? Then Abraham stretched out his hand and took out his knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. Very dramatic. The Lord's messenger, Abraham, now they put question marks like, is it Abraham? Is it Abraham? Okay, no. This is your exclamation points. Sorry, CEB. Right? Abraham. Why this Abraham? Why twice? Stop! For God's sake, what are you doing? Like, Middleton reads this as, okay, we know this was a failure, right? Like, this was a big fail. Do not carry out the tests any longer. We know what has been revealed is that Abraham doesn't understand God. Now, others, of course, I'm going to offer you two different interpretations of this. Abraham says, I'm here. The messenger says, don't stretch out your hand against the young man. Don't do anything to him. I now know you revere God. That word is more like fear God, and didn't hold back your son, your only son, from me. Does anyone notice a phrase that's missing in that You did not hold back your son, your only son from me? Whom you love. Now this gets really sticky, just as a note. Abraham, do you remember who he intercedes for just before this? Talks to God and says he's really distressed, and God sees Abraham's distress. It's Ishmael. Abraham is deeply distressed about the whole idea of Ishmael going away. Who is older, who's a teenager when Isaac is but a little baby, right, being weaned, or young guy being weaned. So Abe Middleton thinks that maybe that's also like, well, you actually haven't really bonded with this son, right? Like, you're still kind of tied to this other story that you were trying to control. Because how are all of the blessings supposed to come? Why is Isaac so significant in this story? In the story of Abraham? What's so significant about Abraham, of Isaac? Pardon me? The legacy. The promise. Everything that's been promised to Abraham is supposed to come through Isaac. Remember, Abraham's tried to wiggle around this, right? And it's this miraculous birth. And it's possible, Middleton says, that he also never really leans into that. That he still, in some part of him, is still kind of lost in that other story of Ishmael. There's some evidence, by the way, that this may be true. Does anyone remember how Jacob addresses God? Jacob is Isaac's son. And he calls God the God of Abraham and, does anyone know? The what? The what? He calls him the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. That is how Jacob, Isaac's son, refers to Yahweh. Well, no, exactly. So some people think what happens is that, yes, indeed, Isaac does bear the brunt, psychologically and emotionally, of this incident, right? He's afraid of God, and that's what he hands on. And Middleton says, but that's not all. Fear of God is what? The beginning of wisdom, not the end of wisdom. So some think that Abraham does revere God, and the angel notes that. But some think, that wasn't actually the main thing here. Now, Abraham looks up and sees the ram caught by the horns in the dense underbrush. Abraham went over. Now, what do you notice? Like, Abraham goes over and sacrifices the lamb. What's absent in this? So Isaac disappears, and actually disappears from the story in some ways. He offers it instead of his son. He's not asked to do this, by the way. He just decides that we're up here, we got the wood, we're gonna. Maybe God provided the ram. He names the place the Lord sees. That word can be the Lord provides. It's sometimes translated that way. And this is the reason that people say this. Now, there's a second part. The Lord's messenger calls to Abraham from heaven a second time and says, I give my word as Lord that because you did this and didn't hold back your son, your only son, again, not whom you love, I will bless you richly and give you countless descendants, blah, bitty, blah, bitty, blah, bitty. Okay. So this is an extremely difficult passage. Does anyone remember or know what the book of Hebrews says about this story? Does anyone remember?
I believe God is credited with his righteousness.
It's not just credited as righteousness. What's specific about that Hebrews adds to this? Like, they reimagine this story, reading it in light, remember, of what's happened with Jesus. Hebrews is very much a Jewish book. What does he say Abraham knows God's going to do? Think about it from like Christian terms. Yes. In Hebrews, this story, he reads back and he imagines that the reason that Abraham is so confident is that Abraham actually believes when the angel says he believes there's a way that God's going to work this out, even though it's crazy. That there's an impossibility to this God that Abraham actually gets. That is one interpretation of this text that I think we do need to take seriously. I mean, after all, it's in the Bible, but what are the writers of the Bible? No. No, that interpretation is a Christian interpretation after seeing Jesus and after understanding something of the impossibility of the way that God can work out plans in ways that seem impossible to us. And that Abraham's obedience, a word that I think some of us may get squirmy about, we don't talk a lot about obedience here, right? It's like, we're not really into that. But Abraham is obedient. He listens as best he can. Let's put it this way. As best he can. As perhaps misshaped as he is by the culture around him. He obeys at huge cost to him. He risks his future. And that's an interpretation of the story we need to take seriously. Is there a way that we or you are being asked, invited to a kind of obedience that you actually sort of feel like is an impossibility? That would require an imagination as crazy as God resurrecting the dead? That's one way of looking at this text. And it has a great legacy. So I also want to share with you another possibility of the story. I think God risks being misunderstood in order to reform Abraham's moral imagination. Even if he bartered with God for Sodom and Gomorrah, he remains some ways trapped by the values and expectations of a God who in his society is entirely imaginable. The silence of Abraham throughout the stories might have been times for contemplating and considering whether he needed to push back on this God. The God of Abraham, who will become the God of Israel and of Jesus Christ, wants to reform all of our moral imaginations that are infected with misshapen pictures of who God is. Now, it's easy for us to name this when we see it out there. My recent favorite is Hexet's machismo God that kicks you-know-what, who recently quoted, does anyone know what Hexet quoted as scripture? Yeah, Quentin Tarantino in Pulp Fiction. You're like, okay, not quite the Bible, right? But you can see and hear when you listen to Hexet, that you listen to Doug Wilson, his pastor, who wants to, for example, not have me vote as a woman, and would have Dave vote as the head of the household. Oh, that's something I'd just given them. That God, that machismo God, is out there in the social imagination. And it infects even us, perhaps, in subtle ways. Is this God a mean, vicious God, or is this God the merciful, compassionate God we preach about? There are ways that I think we may live as if God still required sacrifices, in ways she does not. Where do we put our time and attention? That's how you tell what a God is, by the way. Or by what you fear. How do you appease your fears? How do I appease my fears? How do I spend my resources, those things most precious to me? Do we give them to the gods of consumption? Politics as constant indignation? Christian faith as unrelenting rage? The God we know, the God who reveals God's self through the Bible slowly and sometimes shockingly unpredictably, like in this story. It's a big risk for God to leave that story, or for Israel to preserve that story. This God also wants us to see joy and experience mercy ourselves. The God we worship does not consume us, does not use us up. That's the God of the ancient Near East. This God does disrupt us, as if by stories like this, but also does that because we need that kind of shaking up in a world that offers us lots of other pictures of how and what God is, or the gods are. I think that perhaps I sacrificed my children or family and friends at times that I thought were good reasons, faithful reasons. I spent time and energy defending myself, for example, against others who seemed hell-bent on getting me fired or robbing me of my career. But I spent a tremendous amount of emotional and psychological energy in that. And you know what? I think it was a crap mom and a crap wife. I don't know what the gods are for you. Come on in, we'll get to see you guys. We've got a little something, we've got some wood over here. No, I'm just kidding. Now, sorry about that. Here's what I want you to remember about this story. The end game of the story is that Isaac is not sacrificed. Our God does not consume us. We are fed by this God. So I don't know what you all need in terms of the gods that you're worshiping or what they're asking of you. But I do invite you to reflect on whether the God that you are worshiping with your time, your energy, your resources, psychological and physical, is the God of mercy and compassion. Or whether you are more shaped by the gods of our society, the gods of individualism, of consumerism, and of politics as usual. The God we worship is a God who invites us to this table, not the God who wants to be appeased and needs us for his ego. So, as we get ready for communion, I invite you to think about that. And come on in, young people. We have a song next, yeah? Oh, good. Yeah. Oh.
So, as Aaron said, this is a table that nourishes us, right? Not one that is here to consume us. On the night on which he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread, and giving thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this to remember me." He did the same with the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup is the new covenant of my blood. Every time you drink it, do this to remember